We start in the United States. The Trump administration is setting a tougher tone on China and Russia ahead of a crucial August the 1st deadline. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said trade talks with Beijing will resume very soon, but warned that China's continued imports of sanctioned Iranian and Russian oil remain a major issue. Bessent added that any failure to secure deals could trigger sharper tariffs, a move he would say pressures nations to negotiate fairer terms. He also called on Europe to stand with the US if Washington imposes secondary tariffs on Moscow. We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Dua, who's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay, for joining us on the program. What do you make of these future talks between China and the US? What are your further thoughts?
Thank you for having me on your show.
Of course.
I think it was a very, I would say, a wise statement coming from the Treasury Secretary that we're not really over-concerned about the deadlines of the various deadlines which have been set up by President or set by President Trump in the last few weeks. But we want a good trade deal. That's what the background which Mr. Bessent gave while talking about what might happen with China or with Russia. Second point, I think, which he made, which you're referring to, is that China could invite itself, China and other countries could invite themselves as secondary sanctions or secondary tariffs, as you put it, in case they continue to import oil from Russia and Iran. This is something which the United States had been making it clear, and President Trump, in his usual style, has said it could be even 500%, and now it's being talked about at 100% or so. But in that, I do see a degree of consistency ever since the sanctions were imposed upon Russia when it launched the war with, or started off its conflict with Ukraine more than 3 years ago. Having said that, all that I'd like to say is that the way to go about is probably what the Treasury Secretary has put it very cogently today, or was it yesterday, and not pressurize countries to say, you come to a deal by such and such deadline, which is now 1st of August, or else you would be inviting yourself all kinds of higher tax than other restrictions which are being talked about. That's if an agreement has to be sustained over time, and we're not talking for a short-term agreements being effected between the two countries. These have to be kind of deliberated upon and mutually beneficial, certainly, but those should not be really, as they say, pushed down the throat of the other party.
Dr. Dua, who do you think holds the upper hand here when it comes to these talks going into them, especially with China continuing to buy sanctioned oil?
I'm not sure if the United States has an upper hand. And I say this with a degree of diffidence, but the reason being that there is a huge dependence of United States upon China. Yes, China also needs a whole lot of things from the United States, including technology, including certain vital materials which come there for it to complete its process of manufacturing and other activities. But the trade deficit is of the United States. United States cannot make the things as quickly, as large volumes, and as competitively as China does. So that, to my mind, it continues to be a bit of the scenario is still in favor of United States. United States will be hurting itself if it imposes, say, 100% duty on imports from China, merely because it's trading with Russia or with trading in Russian oil or the Iranian oil, because the goods which the US needs from China would consequently become more expensive. It will be the United States which will be paying for it to the customers in the United States,
Yes.
and not necessarily Chinese themselves.
Well, that leads well onto my next question, Dr. Jua. How could sharper tariffs backfire on American consumers and industry, particularly at this time of economic and geopolitical uncertainty?
Easily, I think that would be the next step. The United States, certainly in the short run, cannot start producing goods which it imports from a host of countries, and particularly China. The US has to realize, and I'm sure they do, and sage people like Scott Bessent and many others in the government, the US, do realize that United States' comparative advantage is no longer in manufacturing. It's moved to services. And one data which I came by just a couple of days ago, it said the biggest employer in the United States now is the healthcare sector, not manufacturing or no other form of activity, but healthcare for themselves and largely for themselves. That's what's keeping the United States going. And healthcare, as we know, is largely services. So yes, in course of time, the United States could get some bit of its manufacturing back, but it's going to take time. And so to that extent, any tariffs, any restrictions upon meaning the kind of trade which we have, it's no longer very free as it was earlier, with the impositions coming from all over, both sides or all sides. But it would certainly impinge upon the consumers of the United States. They are the ones who would have to pay, and as of now, the economy of the US is not doing badly at all. The inflation is also under control. But
yes,
these things could change overnight if most of the goods United States which come into its territory are subjected to tariffs of various kinds, and China also is hit with secondary tariffs because one of the inputs which it has, raw materials, so to say, for its processing and manufacturing, is imported oil from these two countries.
Yes, Dr. Jua, you are staying with us for further related updates. We now move on. US